very profound welcome to you all, and it's really nice to see so many faces. So my talk is about the practice and parenthood. So I'd like to stress the idea of practice, because I'm not going to tell you the wonderful answers which will solve all our problems as parents or supporters of parents. But it is about practice, about meeting challenges, and maybe we'll have a bit of time to talk about that. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll be talking a bit about my own involvement with the Dharma. I know there are some people who are new, so I'll try not to use too many technical terms. The Dharma is about the rules and regulations of Buddhism. That's maybe not putting it quite right, but it is about what Buddhism is actually about. And we might use the term Sangha. Sangha is mainly how I'll use it is about our Buddhist community. So hopefully there won't be too many technical terms, and if there are, I'll try and translate them. If people can't hear me, then just give a little wave. So what I'm hoping to do is to give a history of my own involvement, something about my ordination and my experience as a mother and grandmother of and how we practice within that, how I practice within that, and may also to come particularly onto the idea of right speech in relationship to parenthood. So I hope this will be an inclusive talk. So I'm sure the core of people are parents, but also there will be supporters of parents, or maybe aunts and uncles, or step-parents. So everyone is invited and everyone is included. Okay. So parenthood in the general community, people who aren't parents can feel quite excluded when they're among people who are parents, whereas in Triratna there's more of an emphasis on people who are single, I think. So these series of, we could call them workshops, are ways of including parents as part of the Triratna experience and validating us as parents in the Triratna experience. So in a way it's quite a revolutionary sort of input, in my view. Right, so I was loosely involved with what was then the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, when my children, and particularly my daughter, invited my son and I to join the Croydon Buddhist Centre and to become part of that. She in fact became a mitra, which is the name for a friend, so it's how to get a little bit more involved in the movement, my choice, to get a bit further in learning about the Dharma. So she was involved, and she brought along me and my son, and it was him who found quite a deep commitment to the Dharma. And in a way that raised some issues for me, because I didn't really know very much about the movement, and it did raise questions about how appropriate and how okay it was for him to be so involved at such a young age. In fact, he was very involved, and even though he was doing well at school, he did think of not taking his exams, his A-levels, and joining the community. And his father and I tried to persuade him against that, but he was very enthused about the community. But a senior order member from the community had a long talk to him, and the senior order member said to him, "It's really important that you get as much education as you're able to, and in that way, if you want to, you can come back and make a contribution to the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, as it then was." And that's what Simon, as he then was, took to heart. And he did go on and was very successful in education, and came back and worked for the organisation for some years. He was their communications officer, and also he edited a magazine called Dharma Life, which drew on all different aspects of Buddhism as well as Triratna. And that prophecy came true in a way. When I was ordained, I've missed out something, so I'll go back to that. Before I was ordained, a friend of mine took me along to the summer retreat. So the summer retreat was like 10 days long, but I only went to 5 days of this summer retreat. And during this time, we meditated and we did pujas, which is a Buddhist ritual, and we did 5 rhythms dance, and I just became enchanted with the Dharma. And I came back and found the London Buddhist Centre and the energy of the London Buddhist Centre, and it reminded me, it brought back memories of the shrine room in Croydon, where I was so struck by the peace and the beauty and the silences of that shrine room. And I found that same peace and beauty and silence in all the shrine rooms that I've visited since then. So I was involved, and I wanted to be a mitra, I decided, and then eventually I wanted to be ordained, to ask for ordination. Now, why did that happen? Well, I will answer that question. I wanted to understand just that little bit more. The thing is, what I learnt from my own education was it's like going up a hill. And when you go to the top of the hill, you think you've arrived, but what is there? Another hill waiting for you to climb. And education is like that. And parenting is like that we never quite reach the end hill. We're always trying to get that little bit further. And that's what I felt each time. I had this sort of intuitive feeling, right, now is the moment I want to ask to be a mitra. Right, now is the moment I want to ask for ordination. And looking back on it, I think, what was I wanting? and that's another question that I'll answer. I was wanting to know enough to make it part of me, so that it would be mine, in the best sense of the word, without me even having to think about it, without me even having to remember all those different lists and all those different theories, but to make it mine. And later on I'll mention the fact that I had quite a serious illness, and I think, looking back on the illness, I think that helped me because it was my practice, I think, that helped to pull me through. Right. So I'll just organise myself. So I haven't been able to be involved with the LBC for a couple of years. I haven't been able to travel because what happened was I developed colon cancer, and I had an operation for that. But what made me very ill was the chemotherapy. I had very, very strong reaction to chemotherapy, so that I developed sepsis and pneumonia, and in fact went into a coma. And during this coma, I had a lot of different experiences, very vivid experiences. I think that people sometimes think that when you're in a coma, you're just not there. You're just not experiencing anything. But in my case anyway, it was a bit like being Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole, because I had very vivid experiences of things with like pink carpets on the walls and very elaborate. The hospital was in my dream, or whatever it was like a 17th century theatre made of all sorts of ornamentation, and very different from the reality. But the strange thing was, even though I was in this rather wondrous place, what I longed for was to get back to the plainness of reality, of the rather ugly hospital room with its white walls. So during this coma, I felt that I was at the doors of death. I wasn't frightened. I was just noticing and thinking about my life and thinking, well, I wonder what will happen. Am I going to die or not? Will I go through that door to the other side, or will I survive? And as I lay there, I thought, well, I have enjoyed my life. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worthwhile to me. And I have made a lot of good connections. I did think about my family and the connection and the warmth, as well as the difficulties between us. And I was quite prepared to die if that was what was going to happen. And then I didn't. So then I survived. And here I am. So my coma went on for about 5 days, and it was so serious that they called my family in, and Srivati, my preceptor, and they called them in to be around my bedside. My daughter said, "What about my brother? Shall I ask him to come tomorrow?" And they said, no, tell him to come tonight. So he did. And I think Sarah suggested to them all that they chanted. So that's what happened. I was vaguely aware of it when I was slowly coming out of my unconscious state, hearing them chanting and gradually coming into being again. And then I was in bed for a long time, well, a couple of months really, and very weak. And the physiotherapist would come in and say, right, we just want you to stand up, which seemed such an imposition. Stand up? Please don't make me do that. In fact, I wasn't the only person who had that sort of reaction, because the physiotherapist said that sometimes when they went in towards, people pretended to be asleep, so they wouldn't have to do any exercises. My daughter would come and say, right, you're ready now to sit in a chair. I would say, no, a chair? Don't make me sit in a chair. That's awful. But eventually there was this urge to survive. It felt like an animal urge to survive. It was beyond meditation. I didn't want to meditate. I just wanted to be there, and something inside me was fighting. I think those times when you don't necessarily name the Dharma or the practice, it's like when it just happens. So that was, looking back on it, that was how I've made sense of what was going on at that time. So I'll see where I'm up to now in my talk. So my family were very important to me at that time, and also the community, the Sangha, and friends in and out of the Sangha. They arranged a whole rota of visits to me, and gradually I recovered. But then they discovered another growth on my liver, and at the time of my operation they discovered I had a detached retina. So during that week I had 2 operations. When I had a detached retina, I was in a sort of tent around my head, and during this operation I was chanting the Shakyamuni mantra, which is the mantra to the Buddha, silently, and I was there for about an hour and I was quite calm. When the pain started, I just calmly asked for more sedation. So it did feel that my practice was paying off at the time. I also wanted to talk about the main subject of my speech, which is right speech. And the term right isn't about right or wrong, but it's about how to find happiness for oneself and others. So if you think about right speech or right livelihood, it is about how to be skillful or unskillful, rather than unskillful. And the thing that attracted me to the Dharma was that those terms, being skillful as opposed to unskillful, because my previous experience of religion had rather been about evil and sin and words like that. But the terms skillful and unskillful give you the space to change and to take responsibility for your own life. So I'd like to say something now about right speech, coming from the Four Noble Truths. And sometimes people get a mistaken idea of Buddhism to say that it is mainly about suffering, and that is an aspect of the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths is about suffering and the causes of suffering, the ending of suffering, and the Eightfold Noble Path to lead from suffering. So the Eightfold Noble Path has 8 aspects to it of how best to live one's life in a way that overcomes one's own suffering and the suffering of others. So the first noble truth is right view. Right view is a sort of transcendental overview of the other 7 views, which is something we're all aiming at. Right view, right intention, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, and right speech. So right speech was very important to the Buddha. Right speech, if we think about it, what a difference it can make if we say only what is true, if we're able to speak in ways that promote harmony among people, if we use a tone of voice that's light and pleasing, kind and gentle, if we speak mindfully so that we speak in ways that are useful and purposeful. So when I think of being a parent, I tend to think about the things I've done unskillfully. So I've done something wrong and they keep coming back to haunt me. So I'd like to tell you a little story, which is from a long time ago when maidens in distress weren't able to do things like walk across a stream on their own. So it's about 2 monks who were walking along on the way to find their temple. And they came to a stream, and by the stream was a maiden, as I told you, in distress, who was finding it difficult to get over the stream, as maidens in those days did. So what happened was that the elder of the 2 monks picked this maiden up, after having asked her if it was all right. She readily agreed. Put her over his shoulder and walked across the stream, and then he put her down. Meanwhile, the young monk was quite set aback by this, and as they walked along, he was ruminating and thinking about it. And eventually he blurted out, "How could you do that? This was a woman, we are monks, you're not supposed to even touch a woman, let alone pick her up." So the elder monk said, "Oh, right. Well, what I want to say is that when we crossed the stream, I put her down. I see that you are still carrying her." So I think that's one of the things that we can easily do, is to carry our worrying thoughts and our recollections of alleged misdeeds, and it can stop us from moving forward, as the monk it stopped the monk moving forward happily. So that's one thing I wanted to say about the way we punish ourselves and blame ourselves. And I've come to the conclusion, after working for many years as a psychotherapist, that our basic patterns rarely change. So, however much we develop, the same old things still come up to hit us on the head. But I think what happens with mindfulness is that we're able to notice them and in time to choose to change our response to those early patterns. So as I say, the patterns may not change, but what does change is hopefully our response to them. I was also talking about just check where I'm up to. So I'd like to invite you to think about what I was saying about old harsh ways of being, harsh ways of talking, and maybe if you could get into pairs, maybe to the person nearest to you. So if there's an odd three, that's fine. Right. So what I'd like you to do, first of all, is to close your eyes. And I'd like to invite you to imagine a time when you might have spoken harshly. Whatever comes to mind. Remember what was going on at that time. And some of those feelings might come up again. Notice as you think about that time when you spoke harshly, what happens in your body. Maybe nothing. Just be in touch with that, what might be happening in your body. And then let go of that. And breathe. Then I'd like you to imagine a time when you've spoken the truth with kindness. Let that in. kindly speech. And if possible, notice any response in your body. Is there any difference between those two experiences? There may not be, there doesn't have to be. Just useful information. And then let that go. And come back here. And just in your pairs or threes, just share between you anything that you felt during that exercise for about a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes.
Did you feel a sensation in your body, a sensation when you thought about it, and did you it's not a nice feeling Can you breathe in? So is it feel like about the noise
So can you finish up what you're saying and come back to the group? Thank you. We have one or two responses. Would anyone like to say anything about what came up for them? Yes, Shamana.
The line between being firm and having strong boundaries, because this is really important. Getting a message across to children that something's unsafe, for example. There's a fine line sometimes between that and harsh speech, because we know that we can scare children or shock them into. Kind of the intention can be, don't you dare do that. You know, that can be behind harsh speech. So when you're really tired and it's the nth time it's happened that day, so just exploring that boundary really.
Yes, so the boundary between harsh speech and actually just being firm and creating safe boundaries. Right. Thank you.
We talked a little bit about how sometimes you're not ready for what a child can bring to you because there's other stuff going on either from your day or from your child, and the child hits you with it and you're not quite mindful about what else you're carrying at that moment, and then you lose it because it's not so much the child, it's a trigger, it's all the backlog that's there as well.
It's what else is going on around you
That you don't see coming.
when the child comes up with some new difficulty.
And they release that.
Yeah.
We talked about bodily sensation. Is it okay to share what we talked about? So we talked about, don't know her name, Donna, and her relationship with her teenage daughter. And she talked about a harsh time when she'd been angry and where she felt it in her body, like a heat. but also that her happiness, her light time with her daughter, which came in waves, she could see that it was happening in waves throughout the weeks and the months, was a light-hearted, warm sensation as well. So it's just heat.
So heat in the body could be positive or negative.
And and this idea of skillful, talking and the anger, the heat that was created, although it was quite difficult, and they both sort of suffering at that moment, it actually brought some resolution, and it was helpful in a way, but it was uncomfortable. And whether that was, whether that was the right kind of heat and anger for that moment, or whether a softer tone would have worked better. We didn't try to come up with a solution.
Yes,
we just kind of dipped that one in there.
Because it seems to me that noticing that sort of thing, noticing the heat, set you a little bit apart from it, so you could have the space to choose how to respond.
And to bring energy, because it was with love that she was angry because she wanted something right for her daughter, and she wanted to help her, So, but it was uncomfortable for her, so she's going the extra mile. Not only is she uncomfortable and feeling that anger for her daughter, but she's doing it out of love and being unrecognised by her daughter that she's doing it out of love, so her daughter's angry back. So she wanted to meet her,
Teenagers are something.
Does that make any sense? I think that's what we talked about.
Teenagers are something else. It's been a bit of a challenge on us. Different from a 5-year-old. I have a 5-year-old, so that's a whole different thing there. But
Right, so teenagers are different to 5-year-olds,
16 seems like
maybe trying to break away from...
I feel that as well. She's kind of, she's kind of wanting that separation, doing her own things or whatever.
Yes, I used to find, on the one hand, they wanted to break away, but on the other hand, they didn't want you not to be there.
Exactly that.
It's
a funny one.
Yeah, so thank you. Yes, I wanted to share something with you that happened when I just after I got ordained, when I attended the first mixed convention of order members. So there was this big convention of order members. There were about 400 people there. It's a big gathering. And Vijayadipa, my son, had just written a book. And because of that, he was giving the main talk at this convention. So there we were at this big convention. I'm a new person, my first convention, my new caser. And he stands up and he says, "Brothers and sisters in the order, and Mum." So from that time, I think people recognise me. "Oh, I know you." And I thought, "Oh, really? Yes, you're Vijayadipa's mother." So on the one hand, I'm very proud of both my children and my grandchildren. On the other hand, it does bring up the issue of our identities. Who are we? Are we mothers? Are we fathers? Are we stepfathers? Are we, what are we? What is our identity? And are we more than that identity? And how are we more than that identity? And maybe that's something that you could go away with, or maybe we might have time to talk about that a little bit. Time goes on. But anyway, I think that's one of the things that I'd like to leave you with. Our sense of who we are as parents. Because part of the Buddhist idea is the idea of insubstantiality, that we are less than what we are in our roles. But living in the world, we have to have certain roles in order to survive. But sometimes those roles cause us pain and suffering. I quite like the idea of shedding rules, but sometimes, so I've come to a balance really of accepting that I can really enjoy, by being a bit more detached, I can enjoy being a mother and a grandmother, living mindfully. The last thing I was going to talk about was another aspect of right speech, which is silence. As I say, I work as a therapist, and the more experienced I get, the less I say. And sometimes during a session I think, I haven't actually said anything. And at the end, the interesting thing is that that particular client will say, "Oh, that was so helpful. Maybe we could have a bit longer." But then I do think about that, and I think, well, what's been happening there is that I've been listening. So it's not just a silence of someone chattering away. I've been listening very, very closely, and listening to the silence behind the words. And in that silence behind the words, there is a communication that's going on between us. There's something beyond us. I'm sorry, but this is what I feel. That's channeled between us. And this is the healing of mindfulness and right silence, really, right listening. This right speech doesn't always have to be, I think, the noble path. It goes beyond the conventions of right livelihood or right concentration. It goes right into the truth of what communication actually is, where something is happening between you which is to do with truth. Maybe in that little moment of silence. So there's a Tibetan prayer which says, "May you have happiness and the causes of happiness. May you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering." And I was thinking about family arguments. Family arguments, like when I'm a therapist, I can hear about family arguments, I can stay calm, be helpful perhaps. But when I'm in a family argument, it's like, oh no, I don't know what to do or what to say. So even after all this time, it's not a panacea. It doesn't just happen that there you are every minute. But the thing is, I try and stay out of it. And like you say, to notice what's going on in one's body, even with teenagers. And that gives us the space to maybe respond in a way which does attune with right speech eventually, and to see the effect of that on our families. So I will conclude to remind you about right speech and what it means. that the term right is leading to happiness for oneself and others, saying only what is true, speaking in ways that promote harmony among people, using a tone of voice that's light and pleasing, kind and gentle, speaking mindfully so that we speak in ways that are useful and purposeful. So, welcome to this group, and do come again. It's been formed to recognise the importance of us as parents and supporters of parents. We are part of the lifeblood, particularly of Triratna in this case. So let us recognise the vital role we play in the life of this Sangha. Thank you.